Hello everyone, welcome back. This is the usual stream for writing a programming language in Rust, and we're nearing the completion of the language at this point. Now, I've probably been saying that for a number of weeks and months at this stage, but I would say that the core features for the language are basically done. And really all I'm wanting to do over the next few sessions is just some tidy ups, add some new tests. There's a few to-do items that I've been refreshing myself on from my, to-do list file. And so I'm going to be attacking a few of those today. And just a recap of what this is and what I'm working on. So I'm writing a programming language called Seed. It's intended to be a stripped down language with a baseline of typical language features that I think a number of people will be familiar with from modern language and modern language syntax and semantics. And particularly it's in the C style family of languages just for its accessibility. And yeah, it's not intended to be too novel on itself, but is intended to be used as a test bed for, number one, different language features, but also for building on top of it. And that's my intention as well, is to follow on from this language to develop a language named Ash, which is intended to be an alternative to Bash scripting, which keeps the ergonomics of Bash ideally, but makes it just a bit easier to use, a bit cleaner, handles edge cases a bit more consistently and uniformly, I suppose, and things like that. So that's kind of where I am at the moment, other than these last few bits that I want to add in. The seed language is basically done, so I'm hoping to move to Ash relatively shortly. And just an intro into the environment that I'm using. So I develop remotely on I think it's a Debian box. I use Mosh to connect to the host. I use Tmux to split the session into different sections and panes. Here on the right hand side, I have an ENTR script that reruns the tests and rebuilds the project whenever a source file changes. The top left here, I have Vim with just a NerdTree plugin. That's the only plugin that I have up here. And then on the bottom left, I have just a regular terminal running Bash. So as always for my stuff, fairly bare bones, not a lot of configuration, basically just enough to be able to launch into the programming part, so which is the part that I find interesting anyway. So that's where we are, and so I'm going to take a look at this Scratch file and just see what we can take a look at next. So there are a few bits here that are maybe a little more important. So there's some error tests and error handling that needs to be handled here, in particular with regards to integer overflows, and also some tests for closures. So I hadn't realized that I potentially didn't have closure tests, although I do. I have a basic closure here and it's implemented, so actually closure test not really needed anymore. So that was quick. So next we will take a look at integer overflow. So there's a section, I'm sure, dealing with, let's see, would it be in integer literal, or maybe it would be in the parser actually. Oh no, not that file. I don't want to open that file because it could end up, whenever I modify the ladder pop parser, it can take a while to recompile. So I don't really want to do that. So let's see, next int literal, next int. And we have parse unwrap. So, max int 64. So let's see what will happen if we have, and is that a signed or unsigned? That's a signed integer. So let's see. And I don't think that I have support for underscores in integers. Do I want to add it here? I mean, it can be useful for formatting integers, so maybe I'll add support for that. I do think it's a nice one. So where will I put that? Yeah, I'll just put it in variables. So we'll need to remove underscores from that string. So we've got a Lexer test. That's interesting. Or rather, a Lexer test failing. Where is that even defined? In mod, I guess. What's going wrong there? Oh. And can I do the same for that? Oh wait, no. Cool, and with that done, assuming that all tests pass when it recompiles, I can move on to this other test, which will be in, what was that variables again? Oh yeah, no, I was commented out. If I do the negative, it's only allowed to do, so that goes to -108, so 0 is taken from the positive integers, not the negative. So we can actually do that. That's taking so long. Oh, because the disk is full. Oh, usual situation. Okay, I'll go ahead and try and rectify that quickly. Okay, so we should have a bit more disk space now. So let's try rebuilding with max int, but then we'll have a runtime errors for int overflow. And underflow. Oh, and there's going to be a failure there because of the lack of semicolons. So make that 8. So we've got underflow and overflow failing as expected, but we're also getting a positive overflow on maximum integer here too. Oh, maybe I don't actually have support for negative integers in the language at the moment. I don't think I do. Yeah, so that's the issue there. So let's see, where will we start? First we'll start with the integer overflow. And let's see, that was in Lexer. I don't like that. I'll have to make modifications here in general because those will result in big compile times each time I make a change, I believe. But it has to be done, unfortunately. So let's start off with this. So Rust int parse. How can I get a lookup on that? So parse int error maybe. So, okay, we have kind. Okay, in the case of empty and invalid digit. Oh, I wonder why that would cause an issue. But anyway, in the case of those two, we would essentially want to do a panic because those should be impossible with the above check. So there was positive overflow and negative overflow. And otherwise, we raise a panic. left in the underscores in the output. Is this a refactoring? It's kind of a new feature. Oh, welcome to the channel, Venomweed. No, it's a relatively modern keyboard, but it does have the, I guess, Cherry MX switches, so it sounds, yeah, like it is a mechanical keyboard, but wouldn't be too old school, I think. Thanks for the question. So with that done, I'll just recompile it so that cargo version in the lock file gets updated. And that all looks fine. That's a good point. I wonder if I actually have one of the old mechanical ones laying about, but then I'm not sure. I guess you could get like a converter from the, I think is a PS2 input to USB. Yeah, it's funny to think that those are like are, you know, people have an interest in those things these days. I must see if I can find some in my stash. And so that is support for, or at least error handling for integer overflow. Then the next thing we need to do is add support for negative integers. So let's see, this would want to go into where, oh, I do have some, okay, I have support for it in the parser, but then it doesn't actually get oh, because the minus is handled separately, it still parses this as a full integer. So what I'd really want to do is change the lexer so that, let's see, oh, I'm in the wrong file. So let's try parsing it that way and getting rid of that. same up here. We will reintroduce the old implementation of max integer, but with the same replacement of because I need to do it like that, with the same replacement of underscores in the output. And we want to go to cargo, and this will just be a refactoring, because in theory the feature already existed, it just wasn't in the, I guess the implementation had its own shortcoming. Oh, interesting. So it all seems to be the same error, unexpected return code. In Lexer mod 166. Unexpected parse error, invalid digit for minus. Okay. So that's an interesting case, because minus can be on its own so it is necessary to distinguish the two cases. So we might need to look ahead twice. Well, there's two options here. There's the option of going back. So this still I don't think is going to do us much good, although it might be necessary after all, depending on the implementation. Yeah, I guess in order to simplify things, it might be as easy to always assume that the minus is separate to the integer. In which case we'll never have an int too low. It'll only ever be an integer overflow. Yeah, so I guess we'll just keep it the way that it was. What we can do is, though, another test for so we can remove negative overflow, because we won't ever be parsing negative integers. So this will be attempt add with overflow. I can remove this to do because that's what is being worked on at the moment. And where exactly is that coming from? Okay, so the stack trace is kind of hidden. So let's go back trace 1 and restart the tests. So let's see, that's happening in eval mod apply binary operation. And that's 804. Cool, and how do we catch that panic? Yeah, I guess I do want to cause an error, but I want it to be a runtime error rather than a panic. Okay, nice. Checked add. That's cool. And it would probably need to have something similar for subtraction as well. Yeah, and multiplication and division should all also do the same. Yeah, all of these except for mod. So add overflow. Go. That would be up overflow with operation. Let's try that. I think there'll be some issues because of ownership, but I'll resolve that when we get to it. Oh, we have up symbol. So maybe I have to do like a clone. Let's try that. Same for div. I'm not sure if a division, well, I guess if you divide it by the kind of inverse of a number, then you could get an overflow. So let's try that. Update mod. So that should be it. We just need to add some tests. And I'm gonna leave out the test for division. I'm too lazy. Or maybe I could do something like that, which is essentially, yeah, I'm not sure how that will work. Actually, I don't think there is. I think there's only integers in this language anyway, so maybe maybe an overflow caused by division isn't actually possible. Yeah, I'm not sure. So yeah, that's basically what we're looking for. That's integer sub overflow. Integer add overflow. Yeah, it was just the file names causing an issue there. And multiplication overflow, same thing, it's just a naming issue. Okay, what's the error now? Is it the position in the file? Oh, it's not outputting the location. Because we haven't put an at location around it. Let's see, what could we do here? Try that. This is actually taking a lot longer than I expected. That's often the case with the things that seem a lot easier. are still failing. Oh, because of the line numbers. So with sub overflow, that's character 30. Multiplication, it's character 27. And character 27 for addition. Still going. So subtraction overflow. Mine still caused an integer overflow. Oh, because I've got the underscores here. No, what's going on now? It's possibly the character number. No, the characters should still be the same. Okay, I'm struggling now to see what the difference is. Have I accidentally deleted a character from these long numbers? 72036. Yeah, I've deleted the character 8, or else added in the character 8, I'm not sure. No, I've deleted the character 8. So 36854, 36854, 36. That was a tricky one. I mean, I could have easily missed that one. Okay, and what's going wrong here? 3685. Oh, it's still got the underscores in the output. Oh no, for this one I do need it to have the underscores. Okay. There we go, finally. Now, if Clippy doesn't raise any issues, then we are done, finally. Cool. Raising an error for duplicated keys in object literal. Oh yeah, that's a good one. It should be straightforward, I think. Yeah. And duplicate arg names, throw error at the point of definition rather than the call point. That sounds good. I'm not sure how easy that will be to do, but we'll see. But I think checking for duplicated keys in object literals sounds like a nice starting point for the next bit of work. Oops. So we'll do a bit of test-driven development here and say that we'll have our tests first. And both of these are going to be error tests actually. So runtime errors, duplicate keys 1, that's going to be A1, A1, basically the same thing here, except the key is going to be A, and we'll have K1 like that. Okay, and so the errors are expected in that there are no errors, and that's a problem here. So what do we want to happen? If we go into mod and go back to object, oh, that's a good point. We also want to have a test like that. So we have vals insert, vals insert, and vals insert. So basically on each of those we'll want to say if the key already exists, then we fail. So Rust B-tree map insert. So we want to check for none. Just thinking, so one subtlety here could be if we want to catch the error, this will only catch the error after it's actually happened, but that's going to be such an edge case. I don't think it'll be a problem. try that. Yeah, so that's being caused by a move, so can we do a clone there? Now for the case of objects being unspread, then we'll ignore the case of values being overridden, because that's kind of intended behavior. Although, now that I think of it, we do kind of want to allow duplicate keys if an unspread occurs earlier in the object. So actually scrap this whole feature. Never mind. So I'll add in maybe some documentation or something to address this. Cool. So that is also done basically. So now we'll take a look at result, because that should be a fairly straightforward one. And I'm just going to take a quick break first. So I'll be back in just a moment. Cool. So I'm thinking one option is to take a look at results. It probably wouldn't take too long to implement. It's really just a refactoring, but in the interest of time, and actually I need to go ahead and discard those changes. But in the interest of time, I'm going to take a look at semicolons. So how will that look? So there's going to be a number of rules. Most of all, it's really just going to be that when an end of line is encountered, then we're going to output a semicolon token. At least that's the basic rule I'm going to attempt to implement at the moment. So let's see, skip white space and comments. So we'll say if it's not ASCII white space, or if it is a new line, is a really long. I guess I'll leave it like that. Let's try with that, and let's say, okay, that's not being used anywhere else. So we'll say we would want to do self-scanner next. Char to move it along. Now we might move that into a function just for the sake of keeping consistency between these different actions, but for the moment, let's see. Okay, we just want a token. Let's try that. This is kind of scary in a way, because I'm like, oh, I have no idea how this will turn out. But it's kind of exciting as well. Could be very interesting. Okay, well, the compiler at least compiled, but as expected, we've got a lot of failures. So what we'll do is go ahead and just run the features tests. And let's start off with something simple. What's one of the first, or what's one of the simplest features tests? We'll go variables, I guess. Okay, and I guess part of the problem as well is that I don't at the moment, or at least the grammar doesn't allow for empty statements. So that could be a little problematic, or at least it would potentially simplify things a good bit if that were allowed. But let's go ahead and try, how about list spread? Actually, there aren't so many lines in that test. And we'll go ahead and remove the semicolons from that. Cool, so that just kind of works out of the box. That's pretty nice. So let's take on something more advanced. This could be tricky because, well, there's a couple of things to take into consideration here. One is if someone does put in an explicit semicolon, and for the moment I think we're just going to say that that's an issue. So let's see, we have scanner index. We know what the first character is. So we can really just skip it. Yeah, so we'll just keep it as it was before, but we just move it into a function for consistency. I wonder what happens when you do it in Golang. Oh, did it just get removed by format? Interesting. So I can't explicitly force that behavior. Do I have Go installed on this? No, I don't. So, well, I'll just... Will I say that explicit semicolons aren't supported? Maybe it's fine. And again, I could do a similar thing where the formatter can prevent it, or not necessarily prevent it, but suggest an alternative by splitting it onto multiple lines. But then if you really want to, you can explicitly do multiple statements on one line. And yeah, let's just go ahead and remove all the semicolons from this file and see what happens with that. I would guess tests that have a blank line in them will result in failures, because at the moment, like I said, the grammar itself doesn't actually allow for empty statements. Unexpected semicolon. And maybe I feel like that could be a problem in the grammar if I just allow semicolons on their own. But it could simplify things if it is allowed. I mean, another workaround is to say that just if a line is empty or consists only of white space, then we don't insert the semicolon. that requires a statement. Yeah, so for the moment we'll just say that if a line is empty, then it doesn't include the semicolon. At the moment, I'm just deliberating whether to allow for the empty statement shortcut. So I do want to keep track of new lines, and when a new line is encountered, we reset our tracking of whether any characters were encountered, and we'll also need to do that as well for special cases of new line, special cases of semicolons being inserted. So let's try this. So I'm just thinking one way this could be implemented as well is to check what the latest token is and where it was, and if it's before the last time we encountered a new line, then we ignore it. But this could be a little easier, just to keep track of the last token that we encountered and then set that to none whenever we encounter a new line. So we have a couple of cases here. So if we have a peak char and we encounter a new line, then we break with a comment, and the new line itself is eaten, shall we say. And that's basically what we want as well. And it's not eaten in the general case. And I will inline this because it does kind of affect how the scanner runs, so it could be useful to make it explicit. Now this is an interesting one. If I don't want a semicolon to be output, then what do I do? Because I kind of want to restart. I want next to be called again. So even with this new change, it could still be useful to allow for empty statements. Yeah, I suppose it would come down to there being almost a hack up here. Now, I'm not loving this. This is a lot of complexity, and it's kind of, the logic is very much split over these two functions, even if it is correct. And it may actually make more sense to do the hackier approach if it makes the logic a bit more sensible. So, at least that's the theory anyway. If there's been a token, then we attempt to output a semicolon. Otherwise, we just keep skipping. But we're still getting these unexpected semicolon descriptions. So let's see. Yeah, and if we leave out the new line, then it should pass. Not really sure why it's taking so long to recompile, considering nothing changed in the actual source files. I hadn't considered that part. That we set latest token to none, but then immediately output semicolon. So there's probably a simpler way of writing this, but for the moment, let's give that a go. Cool, and that's passing now. So let's try the rest of those features. No, still problematic. So what's going wrong here? So let's take a look at break for, perhaps. So we have an unexpected semicolon. Another approach is to just say if the last character that we saw was a semicolon, that we skip it. No, that's what I was attempting to do before. Okay, so here's the issue. We have basically a semicolon being output after the opening brace. And so that's probably the first of our edge cases that we're going to say that, okay, if the last token that we encountered was an opening brace or an opening parentheses or one of these other kinds of characters, or if we're in a parenthesized list, then we'll skip the semicolon output. And in fact, it would be useful to be able to say at the end here, to skip the token output and just restart next. And maybe that can be done by turning next into a loop. And it would potentially simplify a couple of things. So maybe we'll try that. I'll just call this next 2 for the moment. if it's none, first of all, we return none, and actually we can just do that for that case. So we'll have a span, which will be a start location. And all this, if it's an error, then we want to return the error. And for the moment, I'll just create I could have the semicolon logic in this method and say that if the last token was so if we've just returned a semicolon, so we keep track of the last token that got returned, and if it is in a group of special semicolon or group of special tokens, then we will keep looping. Otherwise, we'll return it. So first of all, if there hasn't been a latest token, then we're just going to return the span. But if there was a latest token, we'll inspect that. And this is going to get messier before it gets tidier, but let's just go ahead. And so we have what? So first of all, we really only want to do something if T is also a semicolon. Otherwise, again, we'll return the span itself. Otherwise, we will do a match. So let's see. Brace open. Bracket open. Yeah, so it's a brace. Or brace close. Then we don't actually do anything, we just keep looping. And eventually this will return none. So it looks very hairy at the moment, but in theory it should do what I'm interested in. Oh, it's just loop. Well, I have to define that separately, I guess. Hi Dose2Attitude, welcome to the channel. It's going fine. I've made some of my code a little messier for the moment as I'm implementing support in this language for omitting semicolons, but as I was mentioning before, it should, it's expected to get worse before it gets better, and is expected to get untidier before it gets tidier again. But yeah, exactly. Exactly my sentiment. Yeah, so this is kind of the messier part, but there's also a lot of duplication, a lot of things that can be simplified easily enough, so I'm not too worried at the moment. So with that, I should be able to just replace it with option result. And that's a good point by the Rust compiler that I'm not actually using most of these, so I can remove them. Oh, apologies for that, Dose2Attitude. I think the auto mod is like overly, I don't know, protective of the phrase fool's errand. So apologies for that. I guess if you're able to reword it. refactoring my code base this morning, trying to introduce new patterns and architecture stuff, and realized it might be a fool's errand, just meaning the changes are too large to be worth it. Yeah, absolutely. And I've gone down that rabbit hole on occasion as well, and sometimes you nearly have to do it to realize that it's a bad idea. In this case though, this is potentially the simpler approach. And like I say, I wouldn't really be too worried about all the indentation stuff here. I would say it'll be very easy to refactor this into probably a very shallowly nested approach. I just, taking the naive approach to start with, and then I can refactor it later once it's actually working. And so consider borrowing here. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. And similarly here, what I'm thinking is having this kind of a driver function which handles the looping mechanism at a higher level rather than, because I guess the alternative approach is to have state variables littered throughout the functions or throughout the methods. That will kind of make things a little bit smarter, but in another way, because the logic would be so broken up throughout the functions, it would be difficult to track, at least for me anyway. So that's the reason why I think having a high level driver makes sense to me anyway. And so if any of those cases don't happen, then we return that, and the value is partially moved. So I wonder, can I do a clone here potentially to prevent it being moved? Well, this would actually be the step before transforming tokens into the AST. This is actually the step that parses the tokens from the input stream. And really what I'm looking to do is, so previously in the language you had to have semicolons at the end of every statement, and so I'm updating the lexer now to allow just leaving out those semicolons, but it's using the kind of Go approach, which as far as I understand with how the Go lexer got implemented, was in theory the semicolons are still there. It's just that they're inserted automatically when a new line gets encountered, and it kind of simplifies things a bit because you don't actually have to modify the grammar. Then your grammar stays more or less the same. You're just doing a little bit of magic in between, but thankfully magic in the sense that it's almost like a shortcut. It's not something random or hacky or things like that. There are a couple of switch statements in this file. It is probably bigger than it could be, and there are some areas where I feel like I have switch statements where they could be replaced with like hash map lookups and things like that. But overall, it's not too complicated of a file, so I'm not too worried about the overall approach that's there at the moment. Yeah, something like that, exactly. So with that said, is this the place that the value is being, it's because this is being moved. Do I need to change that to a borrow potentially? Yeah, I get you. At the same time, big if else's can be tricky in their own right as well, because if there's even just one block, like it's grand if everything is doing it in a very uniform way, but if there's even one or two blocks that do like have some little extra logic, then it can really upset the whole refactoring, and you kind of have to start from the start nearly and take those what's it called, those special edge cases into consideration as well. So what's going wrong here? I expected a closing brace, or I got a closing brace, but I expected a semicolon. Yeah, see, that's kind of the tricky part, is that you get most of the way through and then you find there are a couple of edge cases and it kind of scuppers the whole operation. And especially when it is, if you can get 95% of it into the dictionary and then handle the other edge cases in their own special if statements, then it can be fine. But then if half of it has special logic and the other half doesn't, sometimes it can actually be a bit simpler, or at the very least more consistent, to actually just leave it as if else statements, which goes against our own preferences for clean code and stuff. But that's part of what makes this nearly more art than science. Okay, that's pretty cool. So you're able to use kind of more advanced features to work through it. That's nice. So with that said, I'm going to hop back to break 4 and see what's going wrong here. So I have break is being encountered here. And we're saying that if the latest token is a brace, or is a brace open or a brace close, then we keep going. We should also have semicolon in here as well, but that shouldn't be affecting us. At this point, it should be saying that we, like, I'm surprised with this expected semicolon. We should be returning a semicolon after the brace, and this is a bit hacky, but I'm just going to output every token that we return down here. Is clean code good? Worst arguments ever. Uncle Bob is the worst. Is it the test on the right, or yeah? So it's tests on the right, but at the moment it's just running I think one test. I've kind of filtered it down to that. Now, what I would say is clean code. Clean code is a fantastic resource, in my opinion, for getting you started thinking about clean code as a concept. And especially the first number of chapters have a lot of good advice in terms of, in general, keep your functions short and don't repeat yourself. And it has good philosophies on namings, like don't be like, it seems a bit painful sometimes, like, oh, don't be making jokes in your code, like actually make your comments functional. Don't do like Hungarian notation on your variable names, things like that. And there are a lot of those that I think are fairly good principles and kind of context-free advice, but then they're, especially in the later parts of the book, it does kind of get into areas where it's like, well, that's more your opinion rather than something that can be commonly agreed on. So I think it can devolve into kind of arguments then, because it's like, well, how much of this can you take as read versus, and especially it can be problematic as well if you do take all the advice at face value and be like, this is how clean code is, and you should always have, like, one of the big disagreements I would have with the book is its emphasis on having tiny functions and methods. And sometimes when you get to that point, you're really kind of, just over abstracting at that point and breaking up your code so much that it just takes so long to figure out what's going on. Yeah. Now, I would say I would use the first number of chapters as a resource. It's a good place to point to and just be like, here's a line in the sand that we can build on top of. But yeah, tiny functions, it depends. See, it's one of those ones where it depends. And the problem is if you think about it, that's the only way of doing it and that's the best way of doing it, then you kind of get into problems, especially when it comes to something like Golang, where it is nearly implicitly, like there's almost boilerplate implicit in the language itself. And so if you try to reduce, like abstract a 2-line function out of every other function, then because of the nature of the error handling in it, each line that you take out of a function nearly turns into 4 lines. So it's almost, I think someone mentioned earlier, like the concept of a fool's errand. It's nearly a fool's errand to try and make tiny functions in the likes of Go. But because of that experience, I think that's actually helped me see the problems with always striving for tiny functions. Yeah, and that's a good point as well. Small functions for the sake of it. That's like I often have very long functions as well in their own way, but if it's doing something very straightforward or simple, again, like those big if else statements or the huge switch statements, like I do have a couple of them in this project as well. And sometimes if the logic is uniform enough, it's not that big of a deal. And again, it's nearly more, I think the approach of pragmatic programming is more, I guess, a better principle for me, where you're actually thinking about the code in the context of what it's doing and applying, just, I guess, thinking through what needs to be done with the code itself, rather than always just saying, it has to be this many lines of code, or always has to have this much abstraction and things like that. But it's it's always a reminder that the more experience I feel I get with these kind of things, the more you realize the answer to any question is just, it depends. There's very rarely black and white. So getting back to this, we've returned the token break, and then we return the token brace close. And it's correct that in the meantime nothing has been returned there. So will I go back to the skip? It could be the skip white space that's causing the problems here. And maybe if I revert it back to just C equals new line and try it like that. Thanks for the question. It's basically just because I'm using Lallerpop as the parser generator, and that's just the format that it uses for taking the token stream. So that's made things a little more difficult to read. So I'll change my prints into print lines. Cool. So we are back to, we have what? We have the literal for. We've bracket close, brace open, and then we return a semicolon here. But really what we want is, if we're returning a semicolon, so we don't want to return a semicolon after we've encountered a brace open. So maybe I might swap these around because it kind of are. Let's see, I'll just reorder them like this. Oops. Let's try that. I'm really pushing it now. I'd meant to finish up the stream maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago, but this is just quite interesting. So I would be curious to see what happens with this. Okay, so these aren't getting. Oh, it's because I'm never setting latest token. Okay, and that's not going to work because I use it immediately there. So let's try this. And again, this is very messy, but it's all for a good cause. If the token's not a semicolon, well, it depends. Sometimes I'll return. It's basically just changing the logic of when the semicolon gets returned. Sometimes if the semicolon gets encountered, then we will return it, but then there'll be rules for other situations where, if depending on what we've encountered so far in the line, we might not return the semicolon. And it's basically just to work, have a workaround for semicolons, so that semicolons in the language itself can be omitted. So for example, instead of doing this on my statements, I can remove them. And there are different ways of implementing this. The approach that I'm taking now is kind of based on the approach that Go takes, which I've been interested in a while. But it's just a matter of getting, to be honest, I'm just getting kind of sidetracked with like different approaches in my head of how to get this working. But I do think that it will be, once I have the initial rules in place, it should be quite easy to define the rest of it. Well, you see, it is handled by so when you say the parser, you mean the part responsible for constructing the AST. I mean, it is a hack in a way. It's not, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a massive hack. What's going on here? Um, Rust backtrace. Oh, it's just the output is wrong. Okay. So the actual logic, it seems to have run to completion at the very least. Yeah, so that seems to be sorted. And so going back to the point about it being a hack, it kind of is, but in terms of hacks, it's on the better side, because I guess the other, approach is to like adjust your grammar to actually facilitate that. Whereas if we take a look at the grammar here, we can see that there is support for semicolons, and all we're really doing in the lexer is saying, okay, in general the rule is when you hit the end of a line you output a semicolon, and then there's just going to be extra rules for when you don't. And so what's going wrong here? So I guess, this will probably be a matter of adding more rules for when the semicolon gets left out. So I guess I'll tackle a bunch of these one at a time. So there are a bunch of these that are passing, but so about half are passing and half are failing. White space sensitive, only so the only white space that's going to be detected at this point is now going to be new lines, because we're going to be using that to potentially output semicolons in some cases, but the rest of the white space will be ignored, and same with comments. But with all that said, I am taking a bit too much time on this, so I think I'm going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, even though it's gotten to a very interesting point. And I think if I were to knock a few more of these out in terms of handling each edge case one at a time, there would be good coverage, or good enough coverage, that loads of these would just kind of start kind of falling into place. Yes, well, therein lies the trickiness, is that it can be difficult to define it without ambiguity. I mean, I haven't done a huge amount of that myself. There are a bunch of other parts or kind of grammars that I haven't used. Like, I don't think I've used PEG grammars and all these kind of things, and I could spend a bunch of time researching that, constructing it by hand and figuring out all the grammar ambiguities and resolving that. Or, to be honest, this is if this works the way I'm planning, and I'm quite pleased with how it's going so far. Like, it does look like it's going in the right direction. Could just save me a lot of time. Yeah, but again, that depends. I mean, easy is relative, I would say. And it been like, each time you add a new grammar construct or a new feature and things like that, it has the potential to, like, to be honest, I've been very, like, the language that I'm constructing here at the moment is, I would say, very simple, like, in terms of, like, there's very little in terms of novel language features in it. And I've actually been surprised at how many times there have been ambiguities in the grammar and conflicts and things like that. So, I mean, I would say easy is relative. But with that said, I do have to run at this point. I've been having a lot of fun chatting and working through these latest features, but I am going to unfortunately have to call it there. But thanks so much to everyone who was watching and chatting in. Like I say, I really had a lot of fun today, and really looking forward to getting back to this and getting stuck in again. So yeah, thanks everyone. Take care and talk to you again.